When 19-year-old Formula One rookie Julian Reyes publicly declared that seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton was too old and slow, no one expected what would happen next. The racing world held its breath as the young Spanish driver's words echoed through the Monaco press room. But instead of responding with anger, Lewis Hamilton chose a different path, one that would test both drivers in ways they never imagined and ultimately change the sport forever. The bright May sunshine sparkled off the blue waters of Monaco's harbor. Expensive yachts bobbed gently, packed with celebrities and racing fans. The Monaco Grand Prix was the crown jewel of Formula One racing, and everyone who mattered was there. In the crowded press room, cameras flashed as drivers took their seats at the long table. Seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton sat in his usual spot, dressed in a perfectly tailored Mercedes team shirt. At 38, his face showed the experience of hundreds of races, but his eyes still held the same hunger they always had. 3 seats down, the newest driver on the grid fidgeted with his water bottle. Julian Reyes, just 19 years old, wore the white and blue colors of the Williams team. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he leaned toward the microphone. Julian had dominated Formula 2 last year, winning the championship by a huge margin. Now he was the hot new talent everyone was talking about. "Julian," called a reporter from the front row, "this is your first time racing at Monaco. How does it feel to be competing against legends like Lewis Hamilton on such a historic track?" The young driver's face changed. He glanced sideways at Lewis, then rolled his eyes. "Hamilton's time is over," Julian said, his Spanish accent thick with confidence. "He's too old and slow now. I'll show everyone what real speed looks like this weekend." The room fell silent. Journalists looked at each other with wide eyes. No rookie had ever spoken about Lewis Hamilton like that before. Lewis kept his face blank, but the tiny muscle twitching in his jaw gave away his feelings. His eyes, usually warm and friendly, turned hard as stone. This was especially painful because Lewis had been struggling all season. His Mercedes car had technical problems, and he hadn't won a race in months. Julian's words hit a sore spot. After the press conference ended, drivers filed out of the room. Max Verstappen, the reigning world champion, caught up with Julian in the hallway. "That was disrespectful," Max said firmly. "Lewis has won more races than you've even started. You should show more respect." Charles Leclerc, the Ferrari driver, nodded in agreement. "That's not how we talk about each other here." Julian laughed and shrugged. "I'm here to win, not make friends. If Hamilton can't handle the truth, that's his problem." He walked away, leaving the other drivers shaking their heads. Later that afternoon, Lewis sat alone in his driver room in the Mercedes garage. The space was simple but comfortable, with just enough room for a massage table and a small sofa. Right. The table sat a framed photo of Lewis and his father from his first Formula One win, both of them crying with joy. Lewis picked up the photo, remembering that day. He had faced so much just to get to Formula One. As the first and only black driver in the sport's history, he had dealt with racism and doubters his whole career. But he had answered them all with championships and records that might never be broken. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. His teammate George Russell poked his head in. "You okay, Lewis?" George asked. "That kid was way out of line." Lewis set the picture down and smiled slightly. "I've heard worse, trust me. Been dealing with this kind of thing my whole life." "Still, not right," George said, leaning against the doorframe. "Rookies used to respect champions when I started." Lewis stood up and stretched. "The kid will learn about respect soon enough. Everyone does in this sport." He pulled on his racing gloves, ready to head out for practice. either the easy way or the hard way. What Lewis didn't say was how much Julian's words had actually hurt. After 20 years in racing, 15 in Formula One, and 7 world championships, he was facing questions about his future for the first time. The new generation was coming up fast. Cars were changing. His body felt the strain of high-speed racing more than before. Was Julian right? Was his time over? Lewis pushed the thought away. He had overcome too much to let some arrogant rookies who words stop him now. As Lewis walked through the garage toward his car, mechanics and engineers nodded respectfully. They had seen champions come and go, but Lewis was special. His talent was matched only by his work ethic and his kindness to the team. Outside, the Monaco track waited. The narrow street circuit was the ultimate test of precision and bravery. One tiny mistake meant crashing into the barriers. This was no place for the weak or uncertain. Lewis snapped on his helmet, the purple and black design gleaming under the garage lights. As he climbed into the tight cockpit of his Mercedes, he felt the familiar calm that always came before racing. This was where he belonged. What Lewis didn't know was that this weekend would change both his life and Julian's forever. The clash between the rookie and the champion had only just begun, and neither man could guess where it would lead them. Lewis tightened his safety straps and fired up the engine. The powerful roar filled the garage. Whatever happened next, he would face it the way he had faced every challenge in his remarkable career, with skill, determination, and dignity. The battle was about to begin. Dark clouds rolled in over Monaco the next morning. Rain pattered against the expensive hotel windows where drivers tried to get their last bits of sleep before qualifying. For the fans huddled under umbrellas along the track, the weather only added excitement. Wet racing was unpredictable racing. Lewis. Hamilton stood at the window of his hotel room, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. He smiled slightly. While other drivers feared the rain, Lewis had always thrived in wet conditions. His dad, Anthony, had taught him on rainy British tracks years ago, making him practice until he could feel the grip limits perfectly. "Bring it on," Lewis whispered to himself. At the Williams garage, Julian Reyes was less happy with the weather. This was his first time driving the tricky Monaco street circuit, and now he'd have to do it in the rain. His race engineer, Miguel, saw the worry on his face. "Just take it step by step," Miguel advised. "Monaco in the rain is like dancing on ice while juggling knives." Julian forced a confident smile. "I can handle it." But his first qualifying lap proved otherwise. Coming out of the famous tunnel into the harbor section, Julian hit a puddle and lost control. His Williams car spun in a blur of blue and white, missing the barriers by inches. He managed to keep the engine running and limped back to the pits, his heart pounding. "That was close," his team boss radioed. "Take a breath and try again." 2 garages down, Lewis was in a different world. His Mercedes seemed to float over the wet track. Years of experience showed in every smooth movement. While other drivers fought for control, Lewis looked like he was dancing with the rain. By the end of qualifying, the timing screens told the story. Lewis would start the race in 3rd position behind Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. Julian, after finally putting together a decent lap, would start 9th. It was better than he expected after his spin. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, thinking about the race ahead. Monaco was the hardest track to overtake. Starting 9th meant he might finish 9th, unless he took some risks. Big risks. "I'll show them all," he muttered into his pillow. Especially Hamilton. Race day dawned bright and clear, the rain long gone. The streets of Monaco, normally filled with expensive cars and shoppers, were now a racetrack lined with thousands of cheering fans. The atmosphere was electric. In the EA Drivers' Parade, where all 20 drivers rode around the track on a truck, greeting fans, Julian noticed how people screamed for Lewis. Children held signs with his name. Adults reached out just to touch his hand. 7 championships had made him a legend. Julian felt a twinge of jealousy. That would be him someday, the people's champion. When the moment for the race finally came, Julian sat in his car, hands sweating inside his gloves. The 5 red lights above the start line would soon go out, releasing 20 of the world's fastest cars into the first corner. "Focus on a clean start," his race engineer reminded him. "It's a long race." The lights went out. 20 engines roared. The Monaco Grand Prix had begun. Julian got a great launch, his car shooting forward. He saw a gap between Carlos Sainz's Ferrari and Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin. Without hesitating, he aimed for it, cutting across sharply. It was too aggressive. Carlos had to slam on his brakes to avoid hitting Julian. This forced Lewis, who was right behind, to swerve suddenly. "This kid is dangerous," Lewis said over his team radio, his voice calm despite the near miss. The race settled into a rhythm after the chaotic first lap. Monaco was all about patience and precision. One mistake meant hitting the barriers that lined the narrow track. But Julian wasn't in a patient mood. Lap after lap, he looked for openings, taking risks that made the commentators nervous. "The rookie is certainly brave," Martin Brundle said on the worldwide broadcast, "but there's a fine line between brave and foolish at Monaco." By lap 20, the race had an unexpected shape. Max led, with Lewis running a strong second. Julian had somehow fought his way up to 5th through a series of bold overtakes. "P5 is great," his engineer told him. "Let's bring it home from here." But Julian wanted more. Ahead of him was his childhood hero turned rival, Lewis Hamilton. Just seeing the back of that Mercedes made Julian push harder. Lap after lap, Julian closed the gap. His newer tires gave him an advantage. By lap 42, he was right behind Lewis, looking for a way past. "Be careful," his engineer warned. "There's no easy pass at Monaco." Julian didn't listen. Coming into the tight hairpin turn, he saw a tiny gap on the inside. It wasn't really an overtaking spot, but Julian went for it anyway. Lewis, with all his experience, saw Julian coming in his mirrors. He left just enough space to be fair, but no more. The cars touched. A sickening sound of carbon fiber on carbon. Fiber made fans gasp. Julian's front wing broke, pieces scattering across the track. He had to pit for repairs. "Hamilton pushed me off," Julian yelled on the radio, his voice cracking with anger. His race engineer stayed calm. "The replay clearly shows you made a move that wasn't there, Julian." When Julian returned to the track, he was back in 12th place. His chance at a good result was gone. He spent the rest of the race fuming, blaming Lewis for his problems. The checkered flag finally waved, with Max taking the win. Lewis finished a strong second, proving he still had the magic touch at Monaco. Julian limped home in 11th, just outside the points. In the cool-down room where the top 3 drivers waited before the podium ceremony, Julian burst in, still wearing his helmet. "You ruined my race on purpose," he shouted at Lewis, pointing, a finger at the champion's chest. Lewis stayed calm, removing his own helmet to reveal a face damp with sweat, but completely in control. "Review the footage, rookie," he said quietly. "That's not how we race here. You tried a move that wasn't there." Cameras captured everything. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading online. Fans picked sides quickly. Respect Hamilton. And others, Team Julian began trending on social media. Later, after the podium celebration where Lewis stood with dignity despite the earlier drama, he tried to find Julian for a private word. But the rookie had already left the track, avoiding further contact. As Lewis packed up his things in the Mercedes garage, his phone buzzed with a notification. Julian had given a fiery interview to Sky Sports. Maybe Hamilton should retire before he hurts someone. The headline read, "He doesn't belong in this era of racing." Lewis stared at the screen for a long moment, then set his phone down. He had faced criticism and racism his whole career. But this public disrespect from a newcomer felt different. It felt personal. As the Monaco sun set over the harbor, turning the water golden, two drivers headed to their private jets with very different thoughts. Julian, still burning with anger and embarrassment, and Lewis, wondering if the young Spaniard might be right after all. Was his time really over? Or was this just the beginning of his greatest challenge yet? 2 weeks after Monaco, the Formula One circus arrived at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix. For Lewis, this was home. The track where he had won a record 8 times. The fans who had supported him since his first season. Lewis needed this race. The drama with Julian had grown worse. Every day brought new headlines about the Hamilton-Reyes feud. Fans argued online. Former drivers gave their opinions on TV. Even Lewis's social media posts about his charity work were flooded with comments about Julian. Lewis had tried to ignore it all. He focused on training harder, pushing himself in the gym and simulator. The Mercedes team had brought upgrades to his car, promising better performance. "You seem different this weekend," noted his physiotherapist, Angela, as she helped him stretch before Friday practice. Lewis nodded. "Silverstone always brings out the best in me." What he didn't say was how much he wanted to silence Julian with pure speed. No arguments, no drama, just racing. The weather at Silverstone was classic British summer, constantly changing. Friday practice was dry. Saturday morning was wet. By qualifying time, the track was drying but still tricky. These were the conditions Lewis loved. While other drivers complained about the unpredictable grip, Lewis danced with the changing track. His final qualifying lap brought the British fans to their feet, cheering as he took pole position. Julian qualified 6th, and his mood was dark during media interviews. Hamilton just got lucky with the weather, he told reporters, not hiding his jealousy. "Tomorrow will be different." Race day dawned with gray skies threatening rain. Fans filled the grandstands early, many wearing Lewis's merchandise. Union Jack flags waved in the light breeze. This was Lewis's kingdom. In the garage, Lewis felt calm. He had slept well, eaten his usual pre-race meal, and completed his meditation routine. Whatever happened today, he would give everything. As the cars lined up on the grid, dark clouds loomed on the horizon. The track was still dry, but everyone knew rain was coming. The question was when. Weather radar shows rain in about 30 minutes. Lewis's race engineer, Pete, told him on the radio. "But it's changing constantly." "Copy that," Lewis replied. "I'm ready either way." The 5 red lights went out, and Lewis got a perfect launch from pole position. His Mercedes pulled ahead into the first corner, while behind him, chaos erupted. Julian, starting 6th, made an incredible start, shooting past 2 cars before the first turn. By the end of lap 1, Lewis led comfortably. Julian had somehow worked his way up to 4th with some impressive overtaking. The rookie is on a mission. "Today," commented Martin Brundle on the TV broadcast, "but Hamilton looks untouchable out front." For the next 20 laps, Lewis controlled the race perfectly. His lead grew to 5 seconds, then 8, then 10. He was in a league of his own. Julian continued to impress, moving up to third after a bold overtake on Sergio Perez. Now only Charles Leclerc stood between him and Lewis. On lap 29, everything changed. The dark clouds that had threatened all day finally arrived. The first drops of rain fell on the back straight. "Rain at turn 15, Lewis reported calmly over the radio. "Just light for now." Teams faced a crucial decision: pit for rain tires now, or gamble that the shower would pass quickly. Stay out for now, both the Mercedes and Williams teams told their drivers. Track is still mostly dry. Lewis adjusted his driving immediately, taking different lines to find grip on the slippery surface. Julian, less experienced in changing conditions, tried to maintain his dry weather pace. For a few laps, this worked. The rain remained light, falling on only parts of the track. But then, the skies opened fully. What had been a drizzle became a downpour in seconds. Cars began sliding all over the track. Several spun off into gravel traps. Lewis slowed dramatically, but kept control. Julian, running third and closing on Leclerc, was caught by surprise at the fast Maggots and Beckett's section. His car aquaplaned across a puddle and suddenly snapped sideways at over 150 miles per hour. Lewis, just ahead on track, saw the crash beginning in his mirrors. Julian's Williams slid across the grass at frightening speed before slamming hard into the barrier. The impact was so violent that pieces of the car flew in all directions. Then came the flames, small at first, flickering from the back of the crumpled Williams, then growing quickly. Red flag, shouted race control over the radio. Crash at turn 7. All drivers were instructed to return slowly to the pits. But Lewis, seeing the growing fire in his mirrors, made a split-second decision that would change everything. He stopped his car on the track, unclipped his safety harness, and jumped out. Without hesitation, he ran back toward Julian's burning car. Safety crews were rushing to the scene, but Lewis got there first. Through the smoke, he could see Julian conscious, but dazed, struggling with his harness as flames crept closer to the cockpit. Lewis didn't think. Despite the danger, he reached into the car, helped Julian release his belts, and pulled him clear of the wreckage. They stumbled away together just as the fire fully engulfed the car. The crowd watched in stunned silence, then erupted in cheers as they saw both drivers walking away from the wreck. Medical staff quickly took over, guiding both drivers to an ambulance. Julian seemed physically okay, but was clearly in shock. Lewis, despite having just done something extraordinary, was already focused on Julian's well-being. "Check his neck and back," Lewis instructed the medics. The impact was huge. At the medical center, Julian sat on an examination table as doctors checked him over. Lewis waited outside, still in his racing suit, refusing to return to his team until he knew Julian was okay. When finally allowed in, Lewis found Julian staring at the floor. The rookie couldn't meet his eyes. "Thank you," Julian said quietly. His voice sounded young and frightened, nothing like his usual confident tone. Lewis nodded. Anyone would have done the same. Julian looked up then, his eyes red. "No, they wouldn't. I've been horrible to you. I've said terrible things. Why would you risk yourself for me?" Lewis took a seat on a nearby stool. He thought carefully before answering. "Because that's what we do," he said simply. "On track, we're rivals. We fight hard. We race at the limit. But off track, we're all just people trying to get home safely. Julian looked at Lewis with new eyes. Not as an old champion past his prime. Not as a rival to be beaten. But as a human being who had just saved his life without hesitation. The race was eventually restarted hours later, but neither Lewis nor Julian took part. Medical staff insisted both should rest, especially Julian, who had a mild concussion. From his hotel room, Lewis watched Charles Leclerc win the shortened race. He wasn't thinking about the championship points he'd lost. His mind kept replaying the moment of Julian's crash, the fear he'd felt seeing those flames. Lewis's phone buzzed constantly with messages from other drivers, friends and family praising his bravery. Even the Queen had sent a message through her office, commending his extraordinary courage. But the only message Lewis truly cared about came late that night. A simple text from Julian. "I don't deserve what you did today. I'm sorry for everything," I said. "Thank you for saving my life." Lewis read it several times before responding. "Get some rest, rookie. See you at the next race." He set his phone down and looked out at the rainy British night. Something had changed today. Not just between him and Julian, but within himself. The questions about his future, his place in the sport, they seemed less important now. Sometimes it took a moment of crisis to remind you what really mattered. As Lewis finally drifted to sleep, he knew the racing world would be very different when he woke up, for both himself and the young driver whose life he had saved. Lewis woke to sunlight streaming through his hotel curtains and his phone buzzing non-stop. The events at Silverstone were front-page news worldwide. His social media followers had jumped by millions overnight. A hero Hamilton was trending everywhere. Hamilton risks life to save rival Sutterst. Read one newspaper headline. Another proclaimed, "Champion on and off the track. Hamilton's bravest moment." Lewis sighed and put his phone down. He had never been comfortable with too much attention, despite his fame. What he had done yesterday wasn't for headlines or praise. It was simply the right thing to do. His phone rang. It was Toto Wolff, his team boss at Mercedes. "The world is in love with you today, Lewis," Toto said. "What you did was extraordinary." "Anyone would have done the same," Lewis replied. The same words he had said to Julian. "No, Lewis, not anyone. That's what makes you special." Toto paused. "How are you feeling?" Lewis stretched, noticing soreness in his back from the awkward way he had pulled Julian from the car. "I'm fine." "How's Julian?" "Released from hospital this morning. Williams says he's physically okay." Toto's voice grew serious. "You should rest today. The team has canceled all your media appearances." After hanging up, Lewis ordered breakfast to his room, avoiding the crowds of reporters surely waiting in the hotel lobby. He needed time to process everything that had happened. Across town in another hotel, Julian Reyes was having a very different morning. Physically, doctors had cleared him to leave the hospital. A mild concussion, some bruising, but nothing broken. Mentally, though, he was shaken to his core. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flames. He felt the heat, the panic, the certainty that he was about to die. Then Lewis's face appearing through the smoke, calm in the chaos. Julian had barely slept. When his team boss, James Wilson, came to check on him, Julian couldn't hide his exhaustion. "Maybe you should take some time off," James suggested gently. "No one would blame you after what happened." Julian shook his head firmly. "I can't show weakness. I'll be fine for Hungary in 2 weeks." James nodded, but his eyes showed concern. "At least post something on social media about Lewis." Fans are waiting for your response." Julian picked up his phone. What could he possibly say? "Thanks for saving my life after I spent weeks insulting you." Didn't seem adequate. Finally, he typed a simple message. "Grateful to Lewis Hamilton for his quick actions yesterday. Thank you." He stared at it for 5 minutes before hitting post. It felt hollow, insufficient. But Julian had no words for the complicated feelings swirling inside him. Shame for his past behavior, gratitude for being alive, and a new, uncomfortable respect for the man he had tried so hard to dismiss. What no one saw over the next days was how the Silverstone incident affected both drivers privately. Lewis, despite his calm public face, visited his therapist. The crash had brought back memories of other accidents he'd witnessed over his long career. Jules Bianchi's fatal crash, Romain Grosjean's fiery accident in Bahrain. "I didn't think. I just acted," Lewis explained to his therapist. "But seeing a car in flames like that, it reminds you how fragile life is." His therapist nodded. "It's normal to have delayed reactions to traumatic events. Are you sleeping okay?" Lewis admitted he wasn't. Every night since the crash, he'd had dreams of not reaching Julian in time. Meanwhile, Julian's struggles were more immediate and severe. He jumped at loud noises. The smell of his team's garage, fuel, rubber, hot metal, suddenly made him feel sick. It reminded him too much of the crash. In simulator sessions, Julian found himself hesitating at high-speed corners. The fearlessness that had marked his driving was gone. His race engineer noticed, but said nothing, hoping it was temporary. At night, Julian had terrible nightmares about being trapped in fire. He would wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. Pride stopped him from telling anyone, even his family back in Spain. Lewis, concerned about the young driver, had sent a text the day after Silverstone. "How are you feeling? Available if you need to talk." Julian saw the message but couldn't bring himself to respond. What would he say? That he was terrified? That he couldn't close his eyes without seeing flames? That would be admitting weakness to Lewis Hamilton, of all people. 2 weeks later, the Formula One circus gathered in Hungary. The summer heat was intense, making everyone irritable. In Thursday's press conference, all questions to Lewis were about his heroic actions rather than racing. "I just did what anyone would do," Lewis repeated patiently. The real story is how quickly Julian walked away from such a serious crash. The safety in these cars is amazing. Lewis was redirecting attention, trying to normalize the situation for Julian's sake. He remembered his own crashes early in his career, how he had hated the constant questions about them. In qualifying, Lewis's Mercedes was flying. The team's upgrades were finally working properly. He took pole position with a lap that left everyone stunned. Julian, however, struggled terribly. His Williams had the pace for the top 10, but Julian kept making small mistakes. He qualified 15th, his worst position of the season. After qualifying, Julian sat alone in the Williams garage until late. Most of the team had left for dinner. Only Maria Santos, his performance engineer, remained, working on data analysis. She found Julian staring blankly at his racing gloves. "Tough day?" she asked, sitting beside him. Julian looked up, his eyes showing a vulnerability she had never seen before. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," he admitted quietly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the flames. Every time I take a fast corner, I feel the crash again." Maria nodded sympathetically. "That's normal after what you experienced. Have you talked to anyone about it?" Julian shook his head. "Who would understand? They'd just think I'm weak." Maria pulled out her phone and showed Julian something. An interview from years ago where Lewis discussed his mental health struggles after a difficult season. "Talk to someone who understands," she suggested gently. "Someone like Hamilton." Julian scoffed. "He hates me after how I behaved." Maria showed him another clip from yesterday's press conference where Lewis had defended Julian's racing talent when a journalist suggested the rookie might be finished after his crash. "He doesn't seem to hate you," she said. Sunday's race was hot and demanding. Lewis drove perfectly from pole to win his first race of the season. His smile on the podium was genuine, the joy of victory washing away some of the heaviness of recent weeks. Julian finished 12th after a cautious, hesitant race. In the cool-down room before the podium ceremony, Lewis tried to congratulate Julian on finishing the race, knowing how difficult it must have been. But Julian walked away, unable to face the man who had saved him. Lewis looked concerned. He recognized the signs, the flinching at sudden movements, the hollow look in Julian's eyes. He had seen it before in other drivers after bad crashes. Fear was normal. Hiding it was dangerous. That night, after celebrations with his team, Lewis sent another text to Julian. "The fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." Julian read the message 3 times before setting his phone down without responding. How did Lewis know exactly what he was feeling? And more importantly, should he accept help from the very man he had tried so hard to make an enemy? As both drivers flew home from Hungary, they carried burdens invisible to the cheering fans below. Lewis, the weight of a champion fighting his own demons while trying to help the rookie who had disrespected him. Julian, struggling with fear and pride, unsure which was harder to overcome. The next race in Belgium was 2 weeks away. 2 weeks for wounds to heal or for hidden struggles to grow deeper. The famous Spa-Francorchamps circuit in Belgium was one of the most challenging tracks in Formula One. With its high-speed corners and sudden weather changes, drivers both loved and feared it. Lewis arrived early, wanting time to walk the track alone. The peaceful forest surrounding Spa helped clear his mind. As he hiked up the hill toward the famous Eau Rouge corner, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from Julian. "Can we talk?" Privately. Lewis paused, surprised. After 2 weeks of silence, he hadn't expected Julian to reach out. He replied immediately, "Of course. My motorhome. 7 p.m.? Julian's simple "okay" came seconds later. That evening, Lewis waited in his Mercedes motorhome, the luxurious mobile home where he stayed during race weekends. He had made sure his team gave him privacy, no easy task in the busy F1 paddock where everyone noticed everything. At exactly 7 Fru, there was a soft knock at the door. Julian stood outside, wearing plain clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, clearly trying to avoid being recognized. "Come in," Lewis said, stepping aside. Inside, they sat across from each other awkwardly. Julian looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I don't deserve your help," he finally said. "I was horrible to you." Lewis nodded. "Yeah, you were," he agreed, which made Julian look up in surprise. "But that doesn't mean you deserve to struggle alone." The honesty broke the tension. Julian gave a small smile, his first real one in weeks. For the next hour, Lewis shared stories about his own career setbacks, crashes, losses, times he questioned everything. He spoke with an openness rarely seen in his public interviews. "After my crash with Max at Monza in 2021, when his car landed on top of mine, I couldn't sleep for weeks," Lewis admitted. I kept feeling the weight of the car on my head, even though my halo protection saved me. Julian listened intently. Slowly, he began to open up about his own fears. I feel like a fraud, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Everyone expects me to be fearless. But that crash... He shook his head, unable to continue. Nobody is fearless, Lewis interrupted gently. We just learn to work with the E. Fear? Julian looked skeptical. You don't seem afraid of anything. Lewis laughed. I'm afraid of plenty. Spiders, for one. His face grew serious. I'm afraid of letting down the kids who see themselves in me. I'm afraid of not using my platform well enough to create change. He paused. And yes, sometimes I'm afraid in the car. Anyone who says they've never felt fear in a Formula One car at 200 miles per hour is lying. This confession from a 7-time world champion stunned Julian. He had always imagined Lewis as superhuman, beyond normal emotions like fear. How do you handle it? Julian asked. Lewis showed him the meditation techniques he used before races. He explained how he channeled nervous energy into focus. He demonstrated breathing exercises that helped him stay calm under pressure. As their conversation stretched to hours, Julian asked the question that had been bothering him most. Why help me after I tried to make you look bad? After I said all those things? Lewis thought carefully before answering. Because someone did the same for me once, he explained. When I was new to F1, I made mistakes too. I was arrogant sometimes, thought I knew everything. He smiled at the memory. I was lucky to have people who saw past that. What Lewis didn't mention was the real reason. He recognized something in Julian that reminded him of himself at that age. Talented, but carrying deep insecurities. The bravado, hiding vulnerability. The need to prove himself constantly. By the time Julian left Lewis's motorhome, it was nearly midnight. Nothing had been officially resolved between them, but something had definitely changed. Over the next few days at Spa, other drivers noticed them talking in the paddock. Fans posted photos online of Lewis and Julian running together during track walks. The media buzzed with speculation about this unlikely new relationship. Are you mentoring Reyes now? A journalist asked Lewis after Friday practice. Lewis shrugged. We're just talking racing. He's got incredible talent. In qualifying, Julian showed flashes of his old confidence. He pushed harder than he had since his crash, making it into the final qualifying session and securing 8th place on the grid. Lewis qualified 3rd behind the Red Bulls. Before the race, Lewis spotted Julian looking tense in the driver's parade. He moved closer, speaking softly so others couldn't hear. Remember, breathe through it. The fear is just energy. You can use it. Julian nodded gratefully. When the race began, rain was falling lightly on parts of the track. The conditions were tricky, exactly what would have terrified Julian a week ago. But today, he drove with new control. Not reckless like before, but not hesitant either. Just smooth and precise. By the halfway point, Julian had moved up to 6th place. Lewis was battling for the lead with Max, their cars separated by less than a second lap after lap. In the closing stages, Julian found himself fighting with Lando Norris for 5th position. At the top of the hill after Eau Rouge, Julian saw his opportunity and made a clean, confident overtake. The Williams team radio erupted with cheers. "Beautiful move, Julian," his race engineer shouted. "That's the driving we know you can do." Lewis finished 2nd behind Max after a thrilling battle. Julian crossed the line in 5th, his best result of the season. In the cool-down room, Lewis was one of the first to congratulate him. The motorsport press went wild. Hamilton Guide's rival read the headlines. Commentators analyzed the change, in Julian's driving style, noting how it now featured some of Lewis's trademark smoothness. "He's less aggressive, but actually faster," Martin Brundle observed during the TV broadcast. "Sometimes less risk means better results." Over the next few races, a strange new relationship formed between the two drivers. They weren't quite friends, but no longer enemies. They began having coffee together on Thursday mornings before track. Action started. Lewis introduced Julian to his performance coach, Angela, who shared nutrition advice. In Japan, when Julian scored his first podium with a strong third place, Lewis was one of the first to congratulate him in Parc Fermé, giving him a genuine hug before the cameras. Fans were confused, but delighted by this development. The Team Julian and Respect Hamilton hashtags that had once divided fans now often appeared together in posts celebrating both drivers. What the public didn't see were the private conversations, Lewis helping Julian deal with media pressure. Julian asking Lewis about setting up charitable foundations. Lewis sharing books on psychology and performance. Julian showing Lewis Spanish cooking techniques during a rain delay. Both men kept the details of their conversations private. When pressed by media, Lewis would simply say, "Julian's on his own journey. I'm just sharing what I've learned along the way." Behind the scenes, team bosses noticed the change too. Toto Wolff commented to Lewis after seeing him deep in conversation with Julian in the Mercedes hospitality area. "From enemies to friends. I didn't see that coming," Toto said with amusement. Lewis shook his head. "Not friends exactly. Just colleagues with respect." Toto wasn't convinced. "He looks up to you now, you know. The way he talks about you in team briefings has completely changed." Lewis hadn't known that, and it touched him more than he expected. As September turned to October and the championship moved to the final races, something shifted again. Lewis seemed different. More energized on race weekends, but somehow more tired afterward. Only those closest to him noticed, but Julian was now observant enough to see it too. After a particularly grueling race in Singapore, Julian found Lewis, massaging his own hands in the driver's cool-down room, wincing slightly when he thought no one was watching. Julian wanted to ask if Lewis was okay, but before he could, Lewis straightened up and put on his public smile as the TV cameras turned. Their way, on their next morning run, Julian tried to bring it up. "You seemed in pain after Singapore. Is everything all right?" Lewis changed the subject smoothly. "How's your mental preparation going for Austin? That first sector needs total commitment." Julian recognized the deflection but didn't push. Everyone in F1 had secrets, especially about their health. Showing weakness could cost you your seat. What Julian didn't know was that Lewis was fighting a private battle, one that would soon test their new relationship in ways neither could imagine. Azihuain, the Formula One season moved into its final third. Something changed in Lewis. Fans noticed it first on social media. His usually frequent posts about training, his dog Roscoe, and social justice causes became less regular. When he did post, he looked thinner, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. In the paddock, Lewis's energy seemed different. He arrived later than usual for Thursday media duties and left immediately after required appearances. He missed a Thursday press conference in Austin, something he never did. "Lewis is feeling under the weather, but will be fine for practice tomorrow," his press officer explained. Rumors began spreading immediately. Was Lewis planning to retire? Was he sick? His performance on track remained amazing. He was regularly fighting for wins and podiums. But sharp-eyed fans noticed he looked exhausted after races, limping slightly when he thought cameras weren't watching. The Mercedes team protected him fiercely. They limited his media sessions and kept journalists away from his garage. Toto Wolff deflected questions about Lewis's health with practiced ease. Lewis is fully committed to his racing. That's all that matters, he repeated, whenever asked. Julian noticed the changes, too. During their morning runs, which had become a routine at each race weekend, Lewis no longer set the pace. Sometimes he even cut the runs short, making excuses. About team meetings, after a race in Austin where Lewis drove brilliantly to finish second, despite starting fifth, Julian saw something concerning in the cool-down room. When Lewis thought no one was looking, he quickly swallowed several pills from a small container he kept in his pocket. Lewis caught Julian watching and quickly put the container away. "Everything okay?" Julian asked quietly. Lewis forced a smile. "Just vitamins. Getting old, you know." He laughed it off, but Julian didn't believe him. That night in his hotel room, Julian did something he never thought he would do. He researched Lewis Hamilton's recent appearances. He watched interviews, studied photos, and noticed patterns. Lewis had been wearing long sleeves even in hot weather. He often kept his hands in his pockets during interviews. When shaking hands with dignitaries before races, Lewis occasionally winced. The next morning, Julian sought out Angela Cullen, Lewis's trusted physiotherapist and assistant who had worked with him for years. "I'm worried about Lewis," Julian said without preamble. "He won't tell me what's wrong." Angela looked torn, her loyalty to Lewis clearly fighting with her concern. "It's not my place to say," she replied carefully. "But he respects you now. Maybe he'll listen to you." Julian was confused. "Listen to me about what?" Angela just shook her head. "Ask him to take care of himself. That's all I can say." The next race was in Mexico City, famous for its high altitude and physical demands on drivers. The thin air made cooling systems less effective and breathing more difficult. It was always one of the toughest races of the year. In qualifying, Lewis took third place with a lap that looked spectacular but conservative by his standards. Julian qualified seventh, his confidence growing with each race under Lewis's mentorship. Before the race, during the drivers' parade, where all 20 drivers rode around the track on a vintage truck, Julian managed to stand next to Lewis, away from the other drivers. "You don't have to tell me what's wrong," Julian said quietly. "But whatever it is, don't push too hard today. This track is brutal." Lewis gave him a long, measuring look. "I always push hard. That's the job." Once the race began, it became clear. Lewis wasn't following Julian's advice. He attacked immediately, passing Charles Leclerc for second place in the first lap. By lap 20, he was challenging Max Verstappen for the lead with moves that were brilliant but reckless in a way that wasn't typical for the usually calculated Lewis. Julian, running fifth, watched with growing concern. This wasn't the smooth, strategic Lewis who had been mentoring him. This was a driver pushing beyond limits, as if racing against something more than just his competitors. With 15 laps remaining, Lewis finally passed Max with a breathtaking move around the outside of turn 4. The crowd roared as Lewis took the lead and began pulling away. When the checkered flag waved, Lewis had won by 5 seconds. His radio message was breathless but jubilant. "That's how we do it! Thank you, everyone. Great job today." But when Lewis climbed from his car in Parc Fermé, Julian noticed how much effort it took. On the podium, Lewis barely lifted his trophy, letting Max and Charles spray most of the champagne while he stood back. In the post-race press conference, a journalist asked directly about Lewis's health. "There's been speculation that you're dealing with some health issues this season. Can you address that?" Lewis's face hardened. "I'm fine. Focus on the racing. I just won a Grand Prix. Let's talk about that." The journalist pressed further. "But your appearance has changed and—" "Next question," Lewis interrupted sharply. That evening, Julian felt compelled to check on Lewis. He went to Lewis's hotel, texting first to see if he was available. When Lewis didn't respond after an hour, Julian decided to go anyway. As the elevator doors opened on Lewis's floor, Julian was shocked to see Lewis himself collapsed in the hallway outside his room. He was conscious but clearly in severe pain, his keycard fallen just out of reach. "Lewis!" Julian ran to him, kneeling beside the champion. "What happened? Should I call an ambulance?" Lewis grimaced, his face pale and sweaty. "No hospitals, no media. Just help me inside." Julian helped Lewis to his feet, grabbed the keycard, and supported him into the room. Once inside, Lewis collapsed onto the bed, cradling his hands against his chest, his breathing shallow. "I'm calling someone," Julian insisted, pulling out his phone. "Angela," Lewis managed to say. "Call Angela, and my doctor's number is in my phone. Code is 4444. Julian found Angela's number and called. "It's Lewis," was all he needed to say. She promised to come immediately with Lewis's doctor. While waiting, Julian got Lewis water and helped him take medication from a case in his bag. Lewis's hands were visibly swollen, the fingers stiff and bent at uncomfortable angles. "How long has this been going on?" Julian asked quietly. Lewis closed his eyes. "Bad days come and go. Today's worse than usual." Angela arrived with Dr. Phillips, Lewis's personal physician. They immediately took charge, asking Julian to wait outside. Julian paced the hallway for nearly an hour, worried and confused. What was happening to the man who had saved his life? Who had seemed so strong, so invincible? When Angela finally emerged from the room, she looked exhausted. "He's resting now," she said, leading Julian to a quiet corner by the elevators. "The medication will help, but he pushed too hard today." "What's wrong with him?" Julian asked. Angela sighed deeply. "He has rheumatoid arthritis. It's been getting worse all season. The medication helps most days, but the stress of racing aggravates it." Julian was shocked. Rheumatoid arthritis, an autoimmune disease that attacked the joints, causing pain, swelling, and stiffness. He had heard of it, but associated it with older people, not elite athletes in their prime. "Why hasn't he told anyone?" Julian asked. "He doesn't want pity," Angela explained, "and he's afraid the team might replace him if they know how bad it is some days." Julian suddenly remembered all his public comments about Lewis being too old, and felt horrible. He had attacked Lewis for the very thing Lewis was fighting so hard to overcome. "Does Toto know?" Julian asked. "Only that Lewis has some health challenges, not the full extent." Angela looked at Julian seriously. "Lewis would be mortified knowing I told you this. But I'm worried about him. He respects you now. Maybe he'll listen if you tell him to slow down." Julian doubted that. Lewis Hamilton was the most determined person he had ever met. Telling him to slow down was like telling the sun not to shine. The next morning, Julian returned to check on Lewis. He found him dressed and looking much better, though still moving carefully. Lewis seemed embarrassed. "I guess I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," Julian replied, "but I'd like to understand." Lewis explained how he had been diagnosed shortly after his last championship. At first, the symptoms were mild and easily managed with medication, but the stress of the last few seasons, combined with the physical demands of driving an F1 car, had made it worse. "Some days are fine," Lewis said. "Others..." He shrugged. "The worst part is not knowing which it will be when I wake up." Julian was amazed at Lewis's determination. Driving an F1 car was brutally physical. The G-forces, the vibrations, the heat. Doing it while in pain seemed impossible. "This stays between us," Lewis insisted. "I don't want the team worrying or the media making it a story," Julian promised, though he worried about what Lewis was doing to his body. For the next 3 races, Julian watched Lewis closely. He noticed things he had missed before: how Lewis iced his hands after driving, how he struggled with buttons on his race suit, how his physio worked on his joints for hours. Yet Lewis kept performing at an incredible level. In Brazil, during a rainstorm, Lewis drove one of the best races of his career, going from 10th to 1st with a series of spectacular overtakes. Julian finished a career-best 4th in that race. In the cool-down room afterward, he saw Lewis fighting, pain, but hiding it with a smile for the cameras. That night, Julian made a decision that might cost him his new friendship with Lewis. He requested a private meeting with Toto Wolff. "Lewis needs a break before the final races," Julian told the Mercedes team principal directly. Toto was surprised that Julian cared so much. "Lewis won't agree to rest," Toto said. "You know how stubborn he is." Julian nodded. "That's why I came to you instead of him." The next day, Mercedes announced that reserve driver Nyck de Vries would replace Lewis for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, allowing Lewis to recover from exhaustion before the final 2 races of the season. Fans were concerned. Social media exploded with speculation, and Lewis was furious when he realized what had happened. "You had no right," he told Julian angrily when he confronted him in the paddock. "This was my decision to make." Julian stood his ground. "You're killing yourself to prove something, but you have nothing left to prove to anyone." Lewis didn't respond. He walked away, their new friendship seemingly broken by Julian's betrayal. As to Aymon, Julian watched Lewis leave. He wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He had only wanted to help, but instead, he might have lost the respect of the man who had saved his life and transformed his career. The Las Vegas Grand Prix would take place without Lewis Hamilton for the first time in years, and Julian would race there knowing he might have destroyed a friendship just when it was beginning. The Las Vegas Grand Prix was a spectacle of lights and glamour. The track wound through the famous Vegas Strip, passing iconic hotels and casinos. But for Julian, the excitement felt hollow. During Thursday's media day, nearly every question was about Lewis. "Did Hamilton tell you why he's missing this race?" a journalist asked Julian. "That's Lewis's private business," Julian replied stiffly. "I'm focused on my own racing this weekend." But focusing was nearly impossible. Julian kept checking his phone, hoping for a message from Lewis. Nothing came. Lewis had gone completely silent on social media, too, unusual for someone normally so connected with his fans. In the Williams garage, Julian's team noticed his distraction. "Everything okay?" Maria Santos asked, as Julian messed up a simple simulator exercise for the 3rd time. "Fine," Julian muttered. But his mind was back in Mexico City, seeing Lewis collapsed in that hotel hallway. Julian qualified 9th in Vegas, decent, but below his recent performances. The race itself was a blur. He finished 7th, scoring points, but feeling no satisfaction. As he removed his helmet in Parc Fermé, a Mercedes team member approached him. "Toto would like a word when you're changed," she said quietly. Julian's stomach tightened. Was he in trouble for interfering with Mercedes team matters? 30 minutes later, showered and changed, Julian knocked on the door of the Mercedes hospitality. Sweet. Toto Wolff welcomed him in, his expression unreadable. "Sit down," Toto said, gesturing to a chair. "I wanted to thank you." Julian blinked in surprise. "Thank me?" "For caring about Lewis enough to speak up." Toto's face softened. "His doctors?" say he was pushing himself toward serious damage. He's furious with me, Julian admitted. Toto nodded. Lewis doesn't like showing vulnerability. Few champions do. He paused. But the rest has already helped. His inflammation markers are down. Julian felt a small relief. At least his interference had been medically justified. Has he said anything about me? Julian asked hesitantly. Not directly, but he's watching your telemetry data, Toto revealed with a slight smile. Asked for your lap times from practice yesterday. Julian wasn't sure what to make of that information. Was Lewis still mentoring him from afar, or just keeping tabs on a competitor? Back home between races, Julian tried to distract himself by training hard. The season finale in Abu Dhabi was approaching, the last chance to see Lewis before the winter break. A week before Abu Dhabi, Julian's phone finally buzzed with a message from Lewis. I'll be racing in Abu Dhabi, feeling better. Just those 8 words. No mention of their argument, no indication of forgiveness. Julian typed several responses before settling on a simple, good to hear, see you there. When Julian arrived in Abu Dhabi, the paddock was buzzing with Lewis's return. Journalists swarmed the Mercedes garage. Fans held welcome back signs. Lewis himself looked transformed. The rest had clearly helped. His movements were fluid again, his smile genuine. During his press conference, he handled questions about his absence smoothly. Sometimes you need to listen to your body, he said. I'm grateful to Mercedes for giving me the time I needed. He didn't mention his arthritis, nor did he mention Julian. In qualifying, Lewis stunned everyone by taking pole position with a lap that left even his rivals in awe. Julian qualified a strong third, his best ever starting position. But when he tried to congratulate Lewis in the qualifying pen, Lewis gave him a polite nod and moved away to talk to his engineers. The message was clear. Their friendship, or whatever it had been, was over. That evening, Julian sat alone on his hotel balcony overlooking the marina filled with luxury yachts. The beautiful Abu Dhabi sunset did nothing to lift his mood. Had he been wrong to interfere in Lewis's life? Should he have respected the champion's privacy, even at the cost of his health? A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he was shocked to find Lewis standing there. Can I come in? Lewis asked quietly. Julian stepped aside, wordlessly. Lewis entered and walked to the balcony, looking out at the same view Julian had been contemplating. Nice spot, Lewis commented. Better than my room. Julian waited, unsure what to say. Lewis turned to face him. You were right, he said finally. About what? Julian asked. I was killing myself to prove something. Lewis's voice was soft, but clear. After our talk in Belgium, after you started improving so quickly, I felt I needed to show I still belonged in this sport. Julian was stunned. You're Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion. You have nothing to prove to anyone. Lewis smiled sadly. Everyone has something to prove, Julian, even me. He paused, especially when some hotshot rookie starts saying you're too old. Julian winced at the reminder of his earlier behavior. I was an idiot. Yes, you were, Lewis agreed, but there was no anger in his voice. But then you did something no one in my 15 years in Formula One has done. You put my health above my success, above even my friendship. Lewis sat down in one of the balcony chairs, stretching his legs out tiredly. I needed the rest, he admitted. The doctors say I might have caused permanent damage if I'd raced in Vegas. So, thank you. Julian felt a weight lift from his shoulders. How are you feeling now? Better. The medication works well when I actually follow the doctor's orders. Lewis grinned. Which I don't always do. Julian smiled back, then grew serious. Why haven't you told anyone about the arthritis? Lewis's face clouded. Because I don't want pity, and I don't want teams thinking I can't perform. He looked directly at Julian. I've faced doubters my whole career. Being the only black driver meant always having to be twice as good, just to be considered equal. Julian had never thought about that aspect of Lewis's career. How every setback wasn't just personal for Lewis, but somehow represented something larger. People are waiting for me to fail, Lewis continued. I can hear the whispers already. He should retire, make room for new talent. He looked pointedly at Julian. Sound familiar? Julian had the grace to look embarrassed. I never understood what it was like for you. How could you? Lewis replied without bitterness. Your path was different, but now you know some of it. They talked for hours as the sky darkened over Abu Dhabi. Lewis explained more about his condition, how it affected him on race days, the treatments he tried. Julian listened, asking questions, gaining a new appreciation for Lewis's determination. At one point, Julian asked what had been bothering him most. Why did you watch my telemetry during Vegas? Lewis looked slightly embarrassed. Old habits. I've been studying your data since we started talking regularly. You've got incredible natural speed, but your corner entry was too aggressive. Julian was surprised. You've been analyzing my driving all this time? Of course. That's what mentors do. Lewis paused. You didn't think our talks were just about feelings, did you? I was helping you get faster. Julian laughed, realizing Lewis had been coaching him more deliberately than he'd known. Will you keep helping me? Julian asked hesitantly. Lewis considered this. On one condition. You stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I know my limits now. Julian nodded, relieved that their friendship, or mentorship, or whatever it was, could continue. As Lewis stood to leave, Julian had one more question. Does anyone else know about your arthritis? My family? Angela? My doctors? Lewis thought for a moment. Now, you and Toto. That's it. Julian was stunned by this trust. I won't tell anyone. I know you won't. Lewis reached the door, then turned back. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we race each other properly. No holding back. The next morning, race day dawned clear and perfect. Fans packed the grandstands, excited for the season finale. Few noticed the brief conversation between Lewis and Julian during the driver's parade, or the respectful nod they exchanged on the grid. When the lights went out to start the race, both drivers made perfect launches. Lewis led into the first corner, with Max second and Julian a close third. For 40 laps, they raced clean and hard, showing their best skills. Then rain began to fall lightly on part of the track. Some drivers pitted for intermediate tires. Lewis and Julian both stayed out, gambling that the shower would pass. The rain intensified. Julian, running second now after Max pitted, began having flashbacks to his Silverstone crash. His lap times worsened as fear crept in. But then he remembered Lewis's words from their early conversations. The fear is just energy. You can use it. Julian took a deep breath and focused. On his team radio, his race engineer warned him that Lewis was catching fast, despite his Mercedes having engine problems that had dropped him to fourth earlier. Tell Hamilton. Julian hesitated, then continued. Tell him I remember what he taught me. His engineer was confused, but passed the message. Lewis received it just as he caught up to Julian, his car handling beautifully in the tricky conditions despite its reduced power. For 2 laps, They raced wheel to wheel in the rain, sliding, catching, neither giving an inch. But unlike their Monaco battle months ago, this fight was clean, respectful, and thrilling to watch. "This is racing at its finest," commented Martin Brundle on the worldwide broadcast. "Two drivers with total respect for each other and the conditions." 30th. The final lap, Julian could have blocked Lewis unfairly, but didn't. Lewis passed him cleanly to take the win. But instead of speeding away in celebration, Lewis slowed down after the finish line and waited for Julian. They crossed the line together, Lewis pointing at Julian in a gesture of respect that cameras captured for the world. In the cool-down room before the podium, they finally talked. "You could have won that," Lewis said, drinking water after the intense battle. Julian shook his head. "Not the right way. You taught me there's more to racing than just winning." Lewis smiled. "You've changed." "So have you," Julian replied quietly. "You're not hiding the pain anymore." Lewis looked surprised, then nodded slightly. He had driven today honestly, respecting his body's limits while still showing his remarkable talent. On the podium, Lewis did something unprecedented. He called Julian to the top step with him. The crowd was confused but cheered anyway. Lewis raised Julian's hand along with his trophy. "The future of Formula One," Lewis announced for the cameras. Later, in a joint interview, they were asked about their relationship, how it had changed from hostility to respect. Julian started to speak, but Lewis interrupted gently. "Can we talk about the race instead?" Lewis suggested. "That's what matters." The interviewer persisted. "But everyone wants to know what happened between you two." Lewis and Julian exchanged looks, a silent understanding passing between them. "Some things in life are more important than the stories people tell about you," Lewis said finally. "Judge us by how we race, not by the drama." The racing season ended with questions unanswered, but with newfound respect between two drivers from different generations, one fighting a private battle with his health, the other overcoming his fears and arrogance. Both finding something in each other they hadn't expected: understanding. 3 months passed quickly. The winter break, normally a quiet time in Formula Sector 1, buzzed with speculation about the upcoming season. Would Mercedes finally have a car to challenge Red Bull consistently? Would young talents like Julian continue their rise? And most persistently, would Lewis Hamilton retire? The champion had been unusually quiet during the off-season. His social media showed mostly personal time with family and his dog Roscoe, with few mentions of racing. This fueled retirement rumors across the F1 community. Julian kept busy with training and sponsor events. He and Lewis exchanged occasional texts. Nothing deep, just check-ins. Julian was careful not to ask directly about Lewis's health or future plans, respecting his privacy. When the new season finally approached, teams began revealing their new cars. The Williams launch showed a dramatically improved design, with experts predicting Julian could be a regular podium contender. Mercedes delayed their launch, creating more whispers about Lewis's future. Then came the surprise announcement. Lewis would indeed race another season. His decision, delivered through a simple social media post showing him in his race suit with the caption, "Not done yet," sent the F1 world into excitement. Julian texted immediately, "Great news! Ready for round 2? Lewis's reply was simply a boxing glove emoji. The first race weekend in Bahrain brought all 20 drivers back together for the official season launch event. As Julian walked through the paddock, he noticed Lewis talking with his engineers, looking stronger and healthier than he had at the end of last season. They hadn't seen each other in person since Abu Dhabi. Julian wasn't sure how to approach Lewis now. Were they friends? Rivals? Both? The decision was made for him when they literally bumped into each other outside the driver's briefing room. "Sorry," Julian said automatically, then realized who it was. "Lewis, you look well." Lewis smiled. "Feel well too. How was your winter?" "Good. Lots of training." Julian hesitated. "How's your, condition?" Lewis glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "Better. New medication, better management." He studied Julian's face. "Don't worry, I'm following doctor's orders now." Their conversation was interrupted as other drivers arrived for the briefing. But the awkwardness Julian had feared wasn't there. Lewis treated him with the same respectful warmth he'd shown at the end of last season. In qualifying, Lewis took third while Julian secured a surprising second, splitting the two Red Bulls. As they parked in Parc Fermé, Lewis came over to congratulate him with a genuine smile. "Front row," Lewis said. "Williams has built you a rocket." Julian grinned. "Or maybe I just had a good teacher." The race began, under the floodlights of Bahrain at sunset. Lewis got a better start than Julian, taking second place by the first corner. Max led from pole, pulling a small gap over the first 10 laps. Julian settled into third, watching Lewis ahead, studying his lines. The Williams felt better than any car he'd driven. For the first time, he had equipment that matched his talent. By lap 30, tire wear became critical. Max and Lewis both pitted, but Julian's team gambled on extending his stint for 5 more laps. When he finally pitted, he emerged just behind Lewis, but with fresher tires. "You're faster than Hamilton now," his race engineer told him. "You can catch him." Lap after lap, Julian closed in. This time, there was no hesitation, no flashbacks of his crash, just pure focus. With 15 laps to go, Julian was within striking distance of Lewis. Through his visor, he could see the Mercedes ahead, its tires showing signs of wear. "Remember what we discussed in Belgium," came Lewis's voice unexpectedly over the team radio. It took Julian a moment to realize his engineer must have relayed a message from the Mercedes team. Julian smiled inside his helmet. Lewis was reminding him about their conversation on racecraft, about patience, about waiting for the perfect moment. 5 laps from the end, that moment came. Lewis went slightly wide at turn 10, and Julian pounced. He placed his Williams perfectly on the inside, giving Lewis racing room, but firmly taking the position. "Beautiful overtake," his race engineer called. "Now, hunt down Max." Julian caught glimpses of Max ahead, but the gap was too large to close completely. He crossed the finish line in second place, his best ever result. Lewis completed the podium in third. In Parc Fermé, Lewis was the first to congratulate him. "That's how it's done," he said, mimicking Julian's move with his hands. "Couldn't have done it better myself." The podium ceremony felt surreal. Julian stood one step below Max Verstappen, with Lewis Hamilton on the third step. A year ago, he had been an arrogant rookie insulting Lewis in press conferences. Now he was standing among the very best, having earned his place. As the season progressed, a pattern emerged. Lewis and Julian found themselves regularly fighting for podiums and occasional wins. Their battles on track were hard but fair, nothing like their early clashes. Fans began calling them the professor and the student, Lewis the wily veteran, Julian the quick learner. At Monaco, Julian took his first Grand Prix victory after a flawless drive from pole position. Lewis finished second and seemed genuinely happy for him in Parc Fermé, embracing him warmly before the podium. "First of many," Lewis told him as they waited to go onto the podium. "Just don't get too many this season, okay? I'm still hoping for championship number 8. Julian laughed. I'll do my best to stop you. By mid-season, Julian was third in the championship standings, behind Max and Lewis, who were separated by just 5 points. The media loved the narrative, the young challenger taking on 2 established champions. What the cameras didn't capture were the continued private conversations. Lewis still offered guidance when Julian asked for it. Julian still watched for signs that Lewis was pushing himself too hard on bad health days. At the summer break, all teams paused for a mandatory 2-week factory shutdown. Julian went home to Spain to see family, while Lewis posted photos from a meditation retreat. When racing resumed in Belgium, both drivers arrived looking refreshed. The Spa circuit held significant memories for them. It was where their real relationship had begun the previous year. During Thursday's track walk, they found themselves alone for a moment at the top of the famous Eau Rouge corner. Hard to believe it's been a year, Julian commented, looking down the dramatic dip and rise of the track. Lewis nodded. You were barely speaking to me then. I was terrified, Julian admitted. After the crash, I didn't know if I could race at the limit. Again. And now look at you, Lewis said with genuine admiration, fighting for the championship. The Belgian Grand Prix brought unpredictable weather, as it often did. Sunday's race began on a dry track, but dark clouds loomed on the horizon. Lewis led from pole, with Julian fourth after a difficult qualifying. Halfway through the race, rain began falling lightly on part of the track. Some drivers pitted for intermediate tires. Lewis stayed out, as did Julian. It was a gamble. If the rain intensified, they would lose massive time on slick tires. The rain got heavier. Julian, who had worked his way up to second, started to struggle. The memories of his Silverstone crash from the previous year flickered in his mind. His lap times got worse. On the team radio, Julian's race engineer told him that Lewis was also losing time ahead. Tell Hamilton. Julian paused. Tell him I remember what he taught me. His engineer relayed the message, confused by its meaning. Lewis received it as he fought his own battle with the slippery track. A small smile formed behind his visor. He understood exactly what Julian meant, their shared language of racing and respect. For 2 laps, they both slid around the track, neither pitting despite losing time. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the rain eased. They had made the right call and now had a huge advantage over those who had pitted. On the final lap, Julian caught Lewis, who was struggling with tire temperature. They raced wheel to wheel through the forests of Spa, both driving at the absolute limit, but giving each other room. In the final chicane, Julian could have forced Lewis wide, but didn't. Lewis, recognizing this respect, left just enough space on the inside for Julian's last-chance lunge. They crossed the finish line side by side, Lewis just ahead by 0.2 of a second. Instead of accelerating away in celebration, Lewis slowed down and waited for Julian. They drove a victory lap together, side by side, acknowledging the fans. In the cool-down room before the podium, they finally talked. You could have won that, Lewis said between sips of water. Julian shook his head. Not the right way. You taught me there's more to racing than just winning. Lewis nodded, studying Julian's face. You've changed. So have you, Julian replied quietly. You're not hiding the pain anymore. It was true. Lewis had been more open recently about taking rest days when needed. He no longer pretended to be superhuman, and somehow this humanity had made him even more respected in the paddock. On the podium, Lewis did something unexpected. He called Julian to the top step with him. The crowd was confused, but cheered anyway. Lewis raised Julian's hand along with his trophy. "The future of Formula One," Lewis announced to the cameras. After the official ceremonies, they were corralled together for a joint interview. The journalist immediately asked about their journey, from enemies to allies. Julian started to answer, but Lewis gently interrupted. "Can we talk about the race instead?" Lewis suggested. "That's what matters," the interviewer persisted. "But everyone wants to know what happened between you two. How did you go from Julian saying you were too old to this mutual respect?" Lewis and Julian exchanged looks, sharing a silent understanding. "Some things in life are more important than the stories people tell about you," Lewis said finally. "Judge us by how we race, not by the drama." The journalist tried again. "But the fire rescue last year, Julian's first win, now this battle, it's an incredible story." "It's our story," Julian said firmly. "And some parts of it are just for us." Later, as they walked together through the paddock, Julian asked the question that had been on his mind all day. "Do you think we'll be remembered for how we raced, or for how our relationship changed?" Lewis considered this thoughtfully. "People love drama. They'll probably remember the crashes and the conflict first." He smiled. "But the real story is what happened between those moments. The conversations no one heard." Julian nodded, understanding completely. Their journey had been witnessed by millions, but truly understood by only two. As they reached the point where they would go to their separate team buildings, Lewis turned to Julian with seriousness in his eyes. "Whatever happens for the rest of this championship, remember what matters most." "Racing with respect," Julian replied. Lewis nodded. "Exactly. See you in Monza, rival." He winked and walked away. Julian watched him go, still sometimes amazed by how much had changed. From arrogant rookie to championship contender. From Hamilton hater to his most loyal supporter. The season would continue. They would battle each other hard. But something more important had been established. A legacy of how competitors could also be allies. How rivalry could coexist with respect. As Julian turned toward the Williams garage, he saw photographers capturing the moment. Two drivers, from different generations, different backgrounds, different journeys, united by their love of racing at its purest. The real victory, Julian realized, wasn't counted in points or podiums. It was in the lessons passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that the spirit of true sportsmanship lived on. 3 months after the Belgian Grand Prix, the Formula One season had reached its conclusion. Max Verstappen had secured another World Championship, with Lewis finishing a strong second, and Julian an impressive third in just his second season. The winter break brought the usual flurry of team changes and technical developments, but one question dominated all others in the Pipe Arrive. F1 media. Would Lewis Hamilton return for another season at age 40? Rumors swirled daily. Some reports claimed Lewis had already signed a new contract with Mercedes. Others insisted he was retiring to focus on his fashion brand and music interests. Lewis himself remained silent on the subject, sharing only personal posts on social media. Julian followed the speculation with more interest than he admitted to anyone. His own position as a rising star was secure. Williams had built their team around him, and he had delivered with multiple wins. But the thought of an F1 grid without Lewis felt wrong somehow. Then came the announcement of a special press conference at Mercedes headquarters in Brackley, England. No agenda was provided, but everyone assumed it concerned Lewis's future. The day of the press conference arrived cold and foggy. Camera crews and journalists packed the room hours before the scheduled start. Julian watched the live stream from his apartment in Monaco, his stomach tight with anxiety. At exactly 10 a.m., Toto Wolff walked onto the stage, followed by Lewis. Julian studied Lewis's face for clues, but the champion's expression gave nothing away. "Good morning, everyone," Toto began. "Thank you for joining us today. As you've probably guessed, we have an announcement regarding Lewis's future with the team." Julian held his breath. "I've been in Formula One for 17 amazing years," Lewis said, taking the microphone. "It's been the greatest journey imaginable." Julian's heart sank. This sounded like a retirement speech. "I've decided that I will race the upcoming season with Mercedes," Lewis continued, bringing relieved smiles to many faces. "But I want to be honest with everyone today about something I've kept private until now." The room went completely silent. "For the past 3 years, I've been managing rheumatoid arthritis," Lewis said calmly. "It's an autoimmune condition that affects my joints, particularly my hands." Gasps filled the press room. Journalists began frantically typing on their phones. "Some days are difficult," Lewis continued. "Others, I feel completely normal. With proper medication and care, I've been able to compete at the highest level, and with the support of Mercedes, I'll continue to do so." Julian stared at the screen in shock. Lewis was publicly revealing his condition, something he had been so determined to keep private. "Why share this now?" a journalist asked during the question period. Lewis took a moment before answering. "Because hiding it began to feel dishonest, and because I want others with chronic conditions to see that they don't have to limit their dreams." Another reporter raised her hand. "Did your rivalry and then friendship with Julian Reyes influence this decision in any way?" Lewis smiled slightly. "Julian reminded me of something important, that sometimes strength comes in being honest about our challenges, not just hiding them." Julian felt a lump in his throat hearing those words. After the press conference ended, Julian's phone buzzed with a text from Lewis. "Surprise. Call me when you can." 20 minutes later, they were on a video call. "You actually did it," Julian said, still amazed. "You told everyone." Lewis nodded, looking relieved rather than anxious. "It was time. No more secrets. No more hiding. Those pain on bad days." "How do you feel?" "Lighter," Lewis answered honestly, "and a little scared about what comes next." Julian understood completely. "The questions won't stop now. Everyone will be watching how you move, analyzing everything." "I know, but it's better than the constant hiding." Lewis paused. "I have you to thank, in a way. Seeing how you faced your fears after the crash, it inspired me." Julian shook his head, embarrassed. "I didn't do anything except crash and panic afterward." "And then, get back in the car and face it," Lewis countered. "That takes more courage than people realize." They talked for an hour, discussing the upcoming season and their winter training programs. There was a new ease between them now. No longer mentor and student, but equals with mutual respect. 2 months later, all the drivers gathered in Bahrain for the launch of the new F1 season. The first official event was a press conference featuring Lewis and Julian side by side, a deliberate pairing by F1 management to highlight their compelling storyline. The room was packed, cameras flashing constantly. Lewis wore his Mercedes team shirt, looking relaxed and healthy. Julian sat beside him in Williams blue, no longer the nervous rookie, but a confident contender. "Lewis, there are reports that despite your announcement about continuing, you might retire mid-season due to your health issues. Can you address that?" a journalist asked bluntly. The room went silent. Julian tensed, remembering how protective Lewis had been about his condition. Lewis took a moment before answering. "I've been dealing with some physical challenges," he admitted. calmly. "But I'm not done racing yet." He didn't mention specifics about his arthritis or treatment. Julian noticed how Lewis had learned to acknowledge his condition without letting it define him. Another reporter turned to Julian. "Julian, you and Lewis had a rocky relationship that seemed to change dramatically. What really happened after your crash at Silverstone?" Julian looked at Lewis, who gave him a subtle nod. Permission to share their story, at least partially. "Lewis showed me what this sport is really about," Julian said carefully. "It's not just winning trophies, it's about growth, respect, and, sometimes, helping your rivals." Julian didn't mention Lewis's health struggles or their private conversations. He kept his promise. Lewis added, "Julian reminded me why I love racing. Sometimes it takes a challenge to reignite your passion." The press seemed disappointed by these diplomatic answers. They wanted drama, not sportsmanship. "So there was never any real feud between you?" a reporter pressed. Lewis laughed. "Oh, there definitely was. Julian thought I was washed up and I thought he was a reckless rookie." Julian grinned. "I was wrong." "So was I," Lewis admitted. The honest exchange brought chuckles from the room, releasing some tension. After fielding more questions about the upcoming season, technical regulations, and their respective teams, the press conference finally ended. Lewis and Julian walked together to the parking lot, away from the cameras. "You didn't tell them about the arthritis details," Julian noted. Lewis shrugged. "They'll find out eventually, as the season progresses. But I want to be known for my driving, not my diagnosis." Julian nodded, understanding completely. "For what it's worth," Julian said as they reached their cars, "I think this season will be your best yet." Lewis laughed. "Don't get soft on me now. I expect you to race me hard." Julian grinned. "Count on it." As they prepared to go their separate ways, Lewis became serious. "Thank you for speaking to Toto that day," he said unexpectedly. "You were right. I needed the rest." Julian was surprised by the admission. After all this time, he had assumed Lewis still held some resentment about that interference. "Does this mean you're not mad anymore?" Julian asked. Lewis smiled. "I was never mad, just stubborn." They shook hands before parting, both knowing their rivalry would continue on track, but with a foundation of mutual respect that was rare in the competitive world of Formula One. As the season began, fans were treated to a spectacle they hadn't expected. Two drivers from different generations pushing each other to new heights while showing a level of sportsmanship that elevated the entire sport. In press conferences, they defended each other from unfair criticism. On track, they raced, hard but fair. When Lewis had difficult days with his arthritis, Julian never mentioned it to the media, even when it might have given him a competitive advantage. The story that had begun with a rookie's disrespect had transformed into something neither driver could have imagined. Not just a rivalry, not just a friendship, but a partnership that showed the best of what sports could be. Journalists continued trying to uncover the full story of what had happened between them. What had really changed Lewis? Hamilton and Julian Reyes from bitter enemies to respected allies? But some stories weren't meant for public consumption. The truth was more complex than any headline could capture. A story of fear and courage, of illness and strength, of youthful arrogance and hard-earned wisdom. A story only two men truly understood. The new Formula One season unfolded with drama and excitement. Lewis and Julian battled at every race, sometimes finishing just seconds apart. Their on-track fights were intense but always fair, with a respect that fans and commentators noticed immediately. "Watch how they give each other space," Martin Brundle observed during a particularly close battle in Monaco. "That's racing as it should be." hard but clean. After each race, they sought each other out, sometimes sharing private words away from the cameras. They would tap helmets, shake hands, or exchange a knowing nod that seemed to carry meaning beyond the moment. Fans created theories about their relationship. Some believed they had become genuine friends. Others thought it was just a public act to improve their images. The truth, as always, was more complicated. What no one knew, what no one could know, was what had really happened the night Julian had found. Lewis collapsed outside his hotel room in Mexico City. After the doctor had left and Angela had gone to get more ice for Lewis's swollen joints, Lewis had asked Julian a question that changed everything between them. "Why do you race?" Lewis had asked, his voice weak with pain, but his eyes sharp and searching. Julian had given the expected answer at first: to win championships, to be the best. Lewis shook his head slightly against the pillow. "That's what drove me at your age, but it's empty if that's all there is." Julian had been confused. "What do you mean?" Lewis had shared something he'd never told the media. He'd been thinking of retiring before Julian arrived in Formula One. "I'd lost my purpose," Lewis admitted. The records, the wins, they started feeling hollow. Then you showed up, disrespecting everything I'd built, and it lit a fire in me again. Julian had been stunned. "So you should thank me for being a jerk?" Lewis laughed despite his pain. "No, but your challenge forced me to look deeper. Why do I still race when it hurts this much? The answer isn't about proving you wrong or winning more titles." Julian waited as Lewis gathered his thoughts. "It's about the journey," Lewis continued quietly. "About showing people like me, minorities, outsiders, that they belong here too. About using this platform to make racing better than I found it." That conversation had changed both men. For Julian, it revealed the shallow nature of his ambition. For Lewis, putting his purpose into words renewed his commitment despite his health challenges. In the current season, they had created a silent pact. They pushed each other to excellence on track, but supported each other off it. Lewis helped Julian navigate fame and pressure. Julian reminded Lewis to take care of his health, sometimes texting just to ask if he'd taken his medication. After a particularly tough race in Singapore, where Lewis struggled with pain, Julian covered for him in media interviews, drawing attention away so Lewis could recover privately. When Julian faced criticism for a mistake in Japan, Lewis publicly defended him. They weren't friends in the traditional sense. They were something rarer in sports, competitors who made each other better, who understood that respect mattered more than rivalry. As the summer races passed and the championship intensified, journalists constantly asked Julian if he knew anything about Lewis's plans for the future. "You'll have to ask Lewis about his plans," was always his answer. But privately, Lewis had made him a promise. "You'll be the first to know when I decide to retire. Not the team, not the media. You." That trust meant everything to Julian, who had gone from being Lewis's biggest critic to his most loyal supporter. During a rain delay at the Italian Grand Prix, they found themselves alone in the back of the Mercedes garage. Most team members had gone to grab food, leaving them a rare moment of privacy. "I've been thinking," Lewis said, watching rain pound the track outside, "about what comes next." Julian felt a twist in his stomach. "You're not retiring mid-season, are you?" Lewis smiled. "No, not yet. But I've been working on something, a racing academy for underprivileged kids, giving them the chance I almost didn't get." Julian nodded, relieved. "That sounds amazing." "I want you involved," Lewis said, surprising Julian. "Not just as a name, but helping coach the kids. You connect with them in a way I sometimes can't. You're closer to their age, their experiences. Julian was touched by the offer. I'd be honored, Lewis continued. Whatever happens with my racing career, that's the legacy I want to build, not just trophies in a case. Count me in, Julian said without hesitation. When racing resumed after the rain, they fought wheel to wheel for the win. Julian took victory by 0.2 of a second, with Lewis a close second. On the podium, they celebrated together, their respect visible for all to see. The media remained obsessed with uncovering the real story between them. Theories multiplied online. Had there been a secret agreement? Had team orders forced their friendship? Was it all for show? What no one could see was Julian texting Lewis after tough days. Did you ice your hands? What no one heard was Lewis calling Julian after difficult qualifying sessions. Your entry to Turn 7 was perfect. Don't change it. As the season reached its final races, Lewis found himself in contention for his 8th World Championship, a record that would stand alone in F1 history. Julian was his closest challenger, just 10 points behind. The title would be decided at the season finale in Abu Dhabi, the very track where their relationship had truly begun to change a year earlier. Before the race weekend, Lewis invited Julian to dinner at his hotel suite. As they ate, Lewis seemed unusually reflective. Whatever happens Sunday, he said, I want you to know something. You made me a better driver. Julian shook his head. I learned everything from you. Not everything, Lewis disagreed. You taught me that there's strength in vulnerability, that hiding my condition was taking more energy than dealing with it openly. Julian was quiet for a moment. And you taught me that respect isn't weakness, that I don't have to tear others down to build myself up. Lewis nodded. On Sunday, we race, properly. No holding back, no special treatment. May the best driver win. Julian raised his glass. To a fair fight. The Abu Dhabi race lived up to its billing. Lewis took pole position, with Julian alongside him on the front row. When the lights went out, they raced clear of the field, creating their own private battle for both the race and the championship. For 60 laps, they pushed each other to limits they hadn't known existed. Different strategies put them on different tires in the closing stages. Lewis with more grip, but Julian with fresher rubber. With 3 laps remaining, Julian caught Lewis and tried a bold move around the outside of Turn 9. Lewis defended perfectly, firm but fair. The next lap, Julian tried again at Turn 14, almost making it stick. On the final lap, Julian found the perfect opportunity into the hairpin at Turn 7. He placed his car exactly right, and Lewis, seeing the move was clean, gave him just enough space. They ran side by side through the next section, inches apart at 150 miles per hour. As they approached the final corner, Julian was slightly ahead. The championship was within his grasp. Then he saw something in his mirror. Lewis's Mercedes twitching slightly, the rear stepping out as Lewis's hands, suffering on this hot day, struggled with the fine control needed. In that split second, Julian made a decision that few would understand. He took a slightly wider line than necessary, allowing Lewis room to stabilize his car. They crossed the finish line together, Lewis just ahead by half a car length. Lewis Hamilton had won his 8th World Championship by a single point. In Parc Fermé, Julian was the first to congratulate him, embracing him warmly. Lewis looked at him questioningly. He had felt his car step out, had known how vulnerable he was in that moment. You could have taken that, Lewis said quietly, as cameras swarmed around them. Julian just smiled. The best driver won today. Only the two of them knew what had really happened in that final corner, and neither would ever speak of it publicly. The podium celebration was a joyous affair. Lewis, overcome with emotion at achieving the record that had eluded him for so long, raised Julian's hand alongside his trophy. The gesture acknowledged what only they truly understood, that this championship had been earned together through their mutual pushing and support. 3 months later, Lewis announced his retirement from Formula One. As promised, Julian was the first person he told. The press conference that followed was emotional, with tributes flowing from across the racing world. Lewis Hamilton redefined what was possible in our sport, Toto Wolff stated, not just through his driving, but through his character. Julian, now the natural heir to Lewis's position as F1's standard-bearer, spoke with genuine emotion. Lewis showed us that greatness isn't just about trophies. It's about how you lift others up along the way. Lewis's final words at the press conference reflected his journey. When I faced the rookie who said I was too old, I had a choice: to be offended or to be inspired. I chose inspiration, and it gave me the final chapter of my career. What the world never fully understood was how that disrespect had transformed into something remarkable, how a crash and a rescue had opened a door, how illness and fear had created vulnerability that led to strength, how two men from different worlds had found common ground in the most competitive environment imaginable. The Lewis Hamilton Racing Academy opened 6 months later, with Julian as a regular coach alongside Lewis. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds found opportunities they would never have had otherwise. Some would eventually make it to Formula One, carrying forward the lessons of respect and sportsmanship their mentors had learned the hard way. Years later, when asked about his most meaningful achievement, Julian wouldn't mention his eventual world championships or race victories. Instead, he would talk about what he learned from Lewis Hamilton. He taught me that how you win matters more than winning itself, Julian would say. That's his real legacy in the sport. What Lewis did after being disrespected didn't just earn everyone's respect. It transformed a rookie's understanding of what it means to be a champion. The real victory wasn't counted in points or podiums. It was in the lessons passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that the spirit of true sportsmanship lived on in Formula One. And that's the end of our emotional journey with Lewis Hamilton and Julian Reyes. We hope you enjoyed this tale of rivalry turned to respect, and how one act of kindness can change everything. Where are you listening from? We'd love to know. Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about sportsmanship, kindness, and overcoming challenges, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content just like this. We share new stories every week that will touch your heart and lift your spirits. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder about the power of respect and second chances. Together, we can spread kindness and awareness, one story at a time. Until next time, keep racing toward your dreams with respect and integrity.